If you have type O positive blood, your body holds a record. This record is much older than your name. It is older than your country. It is even older than any history book. For most of the last century, scientists saw blood type as a minor medical detail. It was a letter on a hospital form, a code for transfusions. Nothing more. Everything changed when modern researchers started looking at the DNA behind that single letter. That is when the real story began to show itself. Type O positive became one of the clearest signs of human migration on Earth. The deepest part of that sign pointed to a place few people would expect, the heart of Asia. Recent genetic studies completely change how we think about ancestry. They rewrite the story of human movement. They show us who our real ancestors were. A small group of people from Asia quietly spread their blood type into almost every population alive today. By the end of this video, you will never look at your blood type the same way again. Before we get into how scientists missed this for so long, subscribe. The old understanding of blood is about to crack wide open. The first real challenge to the old view of blood types came in 1901. An Austrian scientist named Karl Landsteiner noticed something simple. When he mixed different blood samples, some clumped together. Others stayed smooth. He did not know it then, but he had just found the blood group system. This became the most important way to classify human blood ever recorded. Landsteiner identified 4 basic groups: A, B, AB, and O. For decades after this, biologists made a simple, almost natural assumption. They believed that type A was the oldest. They thought it was the original, the ancestral form. After all, type A appeared everywhere. It seemed widespread. It seemed dominant. It seemed primary. But that idea turned out to be completely wrong. Geneticists finally looked at the DNA inside the gene itself. The whole picture flipped. One single gene on chromosome 9 controls the blood group. That gene gives instructions for an enzyme. This enzyme decides if sugar molecules, called antigens, are placed on the surface of red blood cells. Type O is simply the absence of these specific antigens. It changes everything. How could a blood type once thought secondary become so widespread and dominant across the world? In some Native American tribes, before any European contact, nearly every single person carried type O blood, not just a majority, almost 100%. This was not a random statistical fact. It was a clear sign of a founder population. A small group of ancestors who carried type O passed it down through every generation that followed. When scientists started mapping where different blood types appeared around the world, the patterns were impossible to ignore. In Western Europe, about 40% of people have type A. In parts of northern India, type B shows up more than almost anywhere else on Earth. Sub-Saharan Africa has a balanced mix. But in the indigenous populations of the Americas, the levels of type O amazed researchers. This strong presence of type O points to an undeniable Asian connection. Every serious study of Native American origins, from ancient bones to mitochondrial DNA to full genome sequencing, shows a migration from Asia. The people who migrated brought their blood with them. This movement of people is often called the Beringian standstill hypothesis. Today, across Asia, type O is one of the most common blood types. The exact numbers change from place to place. In the Philippines, about 45% of people have type O. In Vietnam, it's about 42%. In India, especially the north, type B is very common, but type O still has a strong presence. Asia holds a huge reserve of type O genes. This reserve is the source for many of the world's type O populations. Researchers looked at the specific DNA inside the gene for type O. They compared carriers from different continents. What they found was remarkable. The changes that turn off the gene are not the same everywhere. There are many ways to break the gene and still get type O blood. The version most common in East Asian populations has a distinct genetic signature. Scientists often call it the O1 or O2 variant. It carries tiny markers, small differences in the DNA around it. These markers allow researchers to trace it back through time. They followed this trail deep into the Asian continent's past. Something else is hidden in the DNA of type O positive Asian populations. It is almost never talked about: ancient interbreeding. Modern humans moved through Asia over the last 50,000 years. They did not arrive on an empty continent. They met other human groups who had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years before them. Neanderthals were in the west. Denisovans were in the east, across Siberia and Southeast Asia. These groups added to the genetic mix. When you put together type O blood and the Rh positive factor, a pattern emerges. This blood profile is common across Asia. It is also common in populations descended from Asia. Type O positive is the most common blood type on Earth. It carries the deepest Asian ancestral fingerprint. But why did this specific blood type become so widespread? Genetics always comes with trade-offs. Nothing is free. So why did type O survive so well? Researchers have offered several answers. The most convincing ones involve disease. For most of human history, the biggest threats were not predators or wars. They were infections, plagues, and parasites. It turns out blood type has a clear connection to how your body fights disease. Type O carriers, on average, face a lower risk of severe problems from some types of malaria. They also show different vulnerabilities to certain bacterial infections. They seem to have a slightly changed response to viral diseases. This includes, as newer research suggests, the SARS family of viruses, like the one that caused COVID-19. None of this means type O protects you from everything. It is not a shield, but over hundreds of thousands of years, and through dozens of plagues, small advantages add up. A blood type that gives you even a 1% better chance of surviving childhood when a disease sweeps through your village will eventually dominate the gene pool. This is a leading explanation for why type O became so common in indigenous Asian populations, their descendants in the Americas, and many isolated communities elsewhere. It survived not because it was perfect, but because its carriers survived just slightly better when the worst diseases hit. However, there is a price. Type O blood links to a higher lifetime risk of certain conditions. Stomach ulcers appear more often in type O carriers. This is especially true with a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori, which grows more easily in the stomach environment of type O individuals. There is a documented link between type O, H. pylori, and higher rates of stomach cancer in East Asian populations. This is one of the big questions in modern blood genetics. Why does the same blood type that may have protected our Asian ancestors from one set of diseases now expose their descendants to another? If you find this deep dive into human biology and history fascinating, consider subscribing. It helps us keep exploring these hidden connections. The Bombay phenotype is a striking example. This incredibly rare blood profile was first found in 1952 in the city then known as Bombay, now Mumbai. On a basic blood test, someone with this phenotype appears to be type O, but at a deeper genetic level, they are very different. These individuals lack a critical sugar molecule called the H antigen. This antigen sits beneath the A and B antigens in normal blood. Without it, the body simply cannot build A or B antigens, even if their genes would otherwise allow it. So, while they test as O, they are not conventional type O. This difference carries a real danger. They cannot safely receive standard type O blood. They can only get blood from other Bombay phenotype donors. This condition is most common in the Indian subcontinent. There it appears in about 1 in 10,000 people. In the rest of the world, it is far rarer, closer to 1 in a million. The Bombay phenotype reminds us that even within type O, there are layers of genetic variation. Mainstream blood typing does not capture all of them. Many of these deeper genetic layers trace back to South Asia. If blood types are a map, what migrations does type O positive specifically trace across the globe? Their blood remembers paths their families forgot. The story of type O positive blood looks less like a medical category and more like a map. It maps where humans came from. It shows who survived and who did not. It charts the silent migrations that moved ancient Asians. They went across the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas. They crossed the islands of Southeast Asia into the Pacific. They traveled back across the steppes into Central Asia and the edges of Europe. Every time scientists have studied the genetic makeup of type O positive groups, they found Asia. Sometimes it is a recent connection. Sometimes it is ancient. Sometimes it filtered through tens of thousands of years of mixing and movement. But Asia is always there. New tools in ancient DNA technology have made this story clearer. In the last 15 years, researchers took readable DNA from human remains. These remains were 5,000, 10,000, even 40,000 years old. They sequenced the genes of people from the Ice Age. They sequenced people from the rise of farming. They sequenced people from the first civilizations. Each time they checked blood type in these ancient individuals, they learned something new. They found that type O was common in East Asia at least 30,000 years ago. They also found that modern Native Americans' ancestors had even more type O blood than their descendants today. Early Chinese Neolithic farmers carried unique type O versions. These match patterns still seen in southern Chinese populations now. The DNA of the dead proved what the DNA of the living already hinted at. Type O positive has Asian roots that go deep into prehistory. Type O dominated these ancient groups, far more than in the same regions today. This suggests the first users of the Silk Road were heavily Type O. This was before later migrations and invasions changed the genetic picture. It also suggests that today's Type O positive carriers, especially those with East Asian, Central Asian, or South Asian family lines, often descend from those ancient trade networks. The Silk Road is one migration, but what about other major population movements and their Type O signatures? The ocean did not erase the inheritance, it carried it. Another major migration began about 5,000 years ago. Seafarers from what is now Taiwan started a slow journey across the Pacific Ocean. Over the next thousands of years, almost every population these sailors reached showed elevated levels of Type O blood. Polynesians especially have some of the highest concentrations of Type O on Earth. They share this with their indigenous American cousins. These are two of the most isolated human populations on the planet. They are separated by the largest ocean. Yet, both carry the same ancient Asian blood signature. DNA cannot yet fully answer every question. Why is Type B so much more common in northern India than almost anywhere else? Some researchers think it comes from an ancient migration out of the steppes of Central Asia. Type B may have first become common there. Others believe it started locally or gave a strong survival advantage in that specific region. Why is Type AB, the rarest of the four main types, slightly more common in East Asian people than in Europeans? This might link to the higher amount of Type B in Asian populations. That mathematically increases the chance of AB offspring. Why have certain isolated groups, like some indigenous people in Taiwan and the Philippines, kept blood frequencies that look almost exactly like ancient Asian profiles from thousands of years ago? It is likely because they stayed relatively isolated. They had less genetic mixing than mainland populations that absorbed many waves of migration. Each of these questions is a thread researchers are still pulling on. Every thread eventually leads back to the Asian origin story. The Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA add more layers to this story. These are the parts of the human genome passed down in unbroken lines. The Y chromosome goes from father to son. Mitochondrial DNA goes from mother to daughter. East Asian people carry specific Y chromosome haplogroups. These are distinct genetic lineages. The ones called O and C link them to ancient Asian ancestors who lived between 30,000 and 50,000 years ago. On the female side, East Asian women carry mitochondrial haplogroups D and M. These also have deep roots in the Asian continent. When researchers compare these ancient genetic lines with blood type frequencies, a pattern emerges. Populations with the oldest, most ancestral Asian Y and mitochondrial lineages also show the most stable and ancient Type O frequencies. The blood type, the male line, and the female line all tell the same story. They all point home to Asia. This has a deeper, almost philosophical layer. Blood type is something we inherit. We do not choose it. We do not earn it. It is given to us at conception by genes our ancestors carried. Those ancestors received it from their ancestors, back through the long chain of human existence. To know your Type O positive blood traces back to ancient Asia is not just a chemistry fact. It is a piece of inherited memory. It is a whisper from people who lived tens of thousands of years before any of us were born. Modern medicine keeps finding new links between blood type and health. People with Type O positive blood often have slightly lower rates of certain heart conditions. This is especially true for problems with blood clotting. They tend to have thinner blood. This reduces some clotting risks, but it also means they bleed more easily from certain injuries. Type O individuals also show distinct patterns of attraction to mosquitoes. This matters in places where mosquito-borne diseases are common. The full story is still unfolding. What is clear is that blood type is not just a minor detail of our biology. It is built into our immune, circulatory, and digestive systems. It reflects the long history of how humans adapted to different environments. The story of Type O positive blood is also about disease and survival. Researchers look at global blood type maps. Then they overlay them with historical maps of major epidemics. Patterns appear. Areas hit hardest by certain plagues often show distinct shifts in blood type frequencies generations later. Populations that survive smallpox waves have one set of patterns. Those who survive the bubonic plague have another. People who endure the harsh disease environments of tropical Asia with constant parasitic and bacterial threats carry unique blood type signatures. These reflect those ancient battles. In many of these regions, type O positive became overrepresented, not because it was chosen, but because the people carrying it survived just slightly better. Survival was the only currency that mattered. Science is still in the early stages of understanding what blood type truly means. Genetic studies get more precise every year. Ancient DNA is easier to extract and read. New connections between blood type and disease, migration, and human adaptation appear regularly. The picture becomes clearer. What is becoming clear is this. Type O positive is not just the most common blood type on Earth. It is one of the most important historical signatures the human body carries. It records the populations who walked out of Asia tens of thousands of years ago. It records who survived and who did not. It records the long battle between humans and disease. It records the small genetic adjustments that let our species keep going when many others failed. What does all of this mean for someone alive today who looks at their medical chart and sees the letter O followed by a plus sign? It means your blood holds a history older than any country. It is older than any flag, older than any border drawn on a map. Your ancestors, no matter where they came from, walk through a story of survival that stretches back tens of thousands of years. Very likely, that journey passed through the heart of Asia. This does not mean your identity changes. It simply means the deep history of human migration touched your bloodstream, and that touch came from a continent whose role in the human story has often been overlooked by Western histories of ancestry. Asia did not just contribute to the human story. In many ways, Asia anchored it. The next time you donate blood, or see your blood type on a hospital form, or write down O and a plus sign for a medical detail, remember this. You are not just describing a chemistry. You are pointing at a thread that runs back through every ancestor who ever lived in your family line. This thread does not begin in any hospital or clinic. It begins in caves, in grasslands, and in river valleys tens of thousands of years ago in a continent where survival was hard. The people who endured there passed their blood forward to you. You are the result of that endurance. You are the living echo of that survival. The DNA inside your red blood cells is, in a quiet way, one of the most ancient artifacts you will ever carry. The broad outline is already clear. It points, again and again, to Asia. It points to the long migrations out of the East, to the small genetic changes that gave certain ancestors a slightly better chance of surviving the next winter, the next plague, the next famine. It points to the quiet, persistent passing down of a blood type that would, in the end, become the most common one on the planet. If you carry type O positive blood, you carry a piece of that history inside you. You carry the inheritance of survivors. You carry the genetic signature of one of the deepest and longest journeys any human population has ever made. Thanks to modern DNA science, you finally have the tools to know what your blood has been trying to tell you all along. Your ancestry is older than you imagined. Your origins are deeper than you were taught. Somewhere in the long line behind you, an ancient Asian survivor passed forward, a quiet, persistent letter, and a small plus sign that would one day end up on your own chart, in your own life, in your own time. Your body carries a record far older than any name, country, or history book. Type O positive blood is not just common, it is a living genetic artifact. It maps human survival and migration. This story is deeply rooted in ancient Asia. Type O positive blood is one of the most important historical signatures the human body carries. It records the populations who walked out of Asia tens of thousands of years ago. It shows who survived and who did not. It is a record of the long battle between humans and disease. It shows the small genetic adjustments that kept our species going, so many others did not. Blood is not just a fluid that moves through your veins. It is a map, a timeline, a library. Inside the cells of every type O positive carrier on Earth, a story is written in chemistry. It is inherited from ancestors. They would be astonished to know their descendants could one day read it.